Hey Senshi, as you can see today, we are not in the sport court. I'm coming to you from my very own apartment. And as you know, some of you may very well know, some of you may not, tomorrow is my birthday. So today I have a special bonus video planned for you, where we're going to talk about swords! We're going to use the internet exactly for what it's for, geeking out about random topics. Our first sword in my collection here is a wooden sword that looks like a replica of the sword Sting from the Lord of the Rings trilogy. It is very well used and loved. My friend who gave it to me participated in wooden sword combat and used this one a lot. Not one of my own, but still, cool looking one. It's nice, it's a little short sword, it's very quick, very nimble. But again, not one of mine. Next up we have Eskrima sticks! These are really good for clacking together. You get a nice sound. If you ever want wood on wood contact, you get Eskrima sticks and you bash them around. You can do drills, you can do timing drills, speed drills, you can do all sorts of really fast maneuvers. But they're just sticks at the end of the day. They represent maybe a sword, maybe a shorter weapon, a bladed weapon, but at the end of the day they're just sticks, so you can just bash them together and you don't care how they look. You can do hooking maneuvers, bashing, cutting maneuvers, all sorts of stuff with Eskrima sticks. These are fun. They're a very valuable tool for training, and they're quick. You can do two-handed maneuvers. You can do one-handed maneuver and brace for impact behind it. They teach you all sorts of stuff about your fighting style. Eskrima sticks, very cool. And they're inexpensive, so you don't care if they get dinged up or broken. You just get new Eskrima sticks, very cheap. Going with the old sparring weapons that I have, my old shinai. Oh man, this brings back some memories. This is one of my oldest swords. It still has some of the strings attached to it, not necessarily the original strings. This back part is still the original string, as it's still attached to the rubbers. I'm not sure I could possibly tie that knot. Maybe. I'm an Eagle Scout. I could probably retie these knots. However, they probably wouldn't be as perfect in line as, say, that one is. The handle is still very good and sticky, even though it is well oiled from my hands and dirty from use. The tip as well is dirtied up from the striking and thrusting of my opponents, into my opponents. Shinai are just great swords. Notice I have no crossguard on here because I don't really use one anyway, although tournament safety requires you use one. But not for training. Shinai are very good because you get hit with a shinai, you feel like you got hit by the shinai. But they also make a really nice noise. Just a great, fantastic noise that you get out of a shinai because of the interlocking wooden segments that they give quite a bit when you hit someone with it. It's just a nice give. But still a rigid sword, very sturdy, so that you can feel when you get hit. There's no bluffing with a shinai. Like, no, you didn't hit me. Oh, I hit you. I think you felt it. Shinai, very good. Very nice long handle too. I like that. As we're doing this roll call for my swords, I notice I have quite a bit of swords around me. So pour yourself a beverage and strap in. Gonna be a long one. All right. And speaking of sparring weapons, I have my old choken. These are padded weapons. This is the padded longsword that we used to use in sparring tournaments for weapon sparring. Now this is the new style of handle because it's padded all the way around to the tip. The older style has this pommel guard, this little rubber stopper, which if you're like me, you like to hit your opponent with, stun them, and then strike with the blade for the point. Unfortunately, or fortunately for my opponents, the newer design has no pommel guard. It's just padded and safe all the way around. These are excellent swords for sparring because your opponent won't get hurt. The most injuries we suffered while sparring with padded weapons was stubbed toes. It wasn't any injury involving the sword or the weapon or the opponent. It was you tripping over yourself, which can happen in anything. It can happen walking down the street. However, because it's martial arts, very important. The weapon doesn't hurt you, you hurt you. Choken. These are great sparring weapons. These are the padded weapons we used to use in tournament. Next up, we've got the short sword version of the Choken, the Kodachi. Now, again, like the Choken, these weapons are bent due to use. They are not made like this. They're normally very straight. However, because I thrust with such force and your helmet goes back yay far, they're now bent due to my exceptional thrusting abilities. I do like to whack people. When you whack someone with a Kodachi, you do feel it. It makes a nice noise. However, because they're padded weapons, the impact is so minimal that your opponent doesn't really feel it. Sometimes that can lead to a bit of a disagreement over points, but that's when the judges come in and have to declare this one got a point, this one did not get a point. They also have the rubber stopper pommel style. However, it's a lot harder to hit with the pommel in short sword because you're in such close fighting combat quarters that you don't really get a chance to whack unless you're very, very well bound up, and then it becomes like a grappling competition, in which case you strike with the pommel because you're that close. Short sword though, short sword, Kodachi, awesome padded weapons. Sparring is so much fun with these because there's something about getting hit in the helmet or the face mask and not getting injured that makes you really want to come back for more. And it gives you kind of a rush to smack someone in the face, and they're okay. That's why I love padded weapons. That's why I love padded weapon sword sparring. Next up, we have very important swords in my collection. Possibly not the ones I fight with the most, even though you could. These weapons are made for full contact sparring. And in some cases, they're even safer than the wooden swords that I spar with. That's right, they're lightsabers. This is a gorgeous lightsaber. It's not my favorite, so I won't mention the company I got it from, although it is a beautiful looking saber. It has a pretty good balance point. However, because of the way the handle is designed, it's hard to put two hands on it without hitting one of the ridges or buttons or being able to twirl the saber, which you want to do in any lightsaber move without putting your hand back on some form of ridge. Because it's not smooth, because there's buttons and surfaces everywhere, it's very hard to actually take your hand off and put it back on and not feel something weird in your hand. Also, the pommel, while the pommel looks really super cool and gives a good balance to the saber, it's exceptionally dangerous. This is what they call aircraft grade aluminum, and it's sharpened. So these edges are quite pointy. So if you catch the pommel wrong, that's not going to feel good the next day. However, the polycarbonate blade is made for full contact sparring, although the tip is just a bit pointy. So if you are allowing thrusts in your sparring match, please do wear protective body armor. But beautiful saber, really good for playing dress up. If all you want to do is hook it on your belt, I highly recommend the look of this cool Temple Guard saber. Next up, my favorite lightsaber in my collection, the Aeon LX super duper lightsaber that has the double choke point, which I really, really enjoy. Doing one-handed moves or two-handed moves, important to get the choke point on there because you can actually hold the saber through one of these choke points, and sometimes you do hit the button and it lights up. Other times you hit the button while doing a move and it accidentally turns off, but that's okay. I don't use it for that, especially if I'm saber sparring. I don't really need the light on or off. I just need the blade to perform. And although this is another polycarbonate blade, I got it used, so I got it on the cheap, which is very nice. Very affordable blade. This also hooks onto your belt. However, with this style of saber, because it is so singular and it's perfect in its beautiful simplicity, it is very easily avoidable due to the double choke point here. The on-off switch is also smoothed and rounded, so even if you do grab it by accident, it doesn't affect your ability to twirl or manage the sword in any way. It's very, very nice designed and looking saber. I enjoy the gold contour. That's why I got it. This is easily my favorite saber in the collection. Next up, we have the Shoto saber. This is a short sword saber, good for one, or if you see, there's a space down here for two hands right in between the on-off switch button. So these are great because you can try little tricks with them. You can fight with them inside. They are so much fun. They're short, they're tiny, they're quick, and they can be used in conjunction with another saber. This is awesome. 2 swords for the price of 1. So you can practice Nitenru or lightsaber form 6 Jarkai. These are pretty cool. Put them away for now. Love lightsabers. While lightsabers aren't traditional martial arts weapons, they're important to study because they are cool. And sword is all about feeling cool and looking good. Or looking good and feeling cool. Next up, we have possibly the weirdest sword in my collection. This one is one of those weird fantasy swords inspired by the Renaissance fair. It is actually designed and shaped almost perfectly for Senshi Kenru. While it is a single-edged sword, it has a curve to it, so it's a definite cutter, more cut-centric than thrust. You can still thrust with it. It still has a point, a very tip. It has a 2-handed handle with a very nice pommel that's shaped so that your hand won't slip off. Perfect for the one-handed maneuvers back into 2 hands that we see so often in Senshi Kenru. It also is balanced like a sword should be balanced. Now this is a very light, flimsy sword. I would not go into combat with this sword. However, it does everything a sword should do. It's weighted, it's balanced, it has a handle, an acceptable grip. It has a cutting edge that is more balanced and aligned, that you'll find you can even cut with this with your eyes closed. You know exactly which way the edge goes because it is balanced and the handle is ergonomically shaped for a very good functional grip. While my complaints of this sword used to be that it would never fit in a sheath due to the weird size of the blade, which you can paint, by the way, and make it look all pretty. I do not have those skills in my repertoire. I just fight with the swords. I cannot really paint them very well. However, this sword does fit in some holder. Maybe not a traditional sword sheath, but I got this little belt loop to hold my drinking vessel at the Renaissance fair. So if I take this guy off here, I can easily slip him around the sword base right here, and now I can hook this sword onto my belt. I can wear it here, I can pull him out. Oh, it goes all the way around, holy moly! And then I can slip it back in. So as long as you have a long enough holder to fit around the thickest part of the sword, you can actually wear this sword on your hip, and it becomes a much more functional weapon for practice and for show only. This is not a sword I would go sparring with. It is very flimsy, but it is very decorative, and it actually is very good to train with. It has a nice feel to it, and I can't say anything wrong about this sword except it was cheap and it was flimsy. but not unlike my Tai Chi weapons, which we have next. Just for practicing your movements in Tai Chi, you have a wooden jian, or straight sword. This is an excellent sword, 36 inches in length. So while it's 3 feet of death, it is not very sturdy. It is a very inexpensive, light sword. And these are just for practicing your movements in Tai Chi. And as you know, in Tai Chi, you go very slowly. And it's all about your form and practicing technique and synchronizing that with your breathing and getting it all together. So you don't need a heavy, beefy weapon for Tai Chi practice because you're not sparring in Tai Chi. Same thing with this wooden guy. You're not going to be sparring with this, but you can practice all the moves in Senji Kenryu with this. Maybe not so much with this. You'd have to learn a traditional Tai Chi form that goes with the jian. But luckily, I practice those too. This is a really nice sword. Again, just simple, elegant in its simplicity for practicing all your movements. The other Tai Chi sword I have is the Dao. A little bit more my style, with still has a point, but this is definitely more of a cutting sword, more of a chopper, although if you use the finesse that you have in Tai Chi, it requires more of the elegant cutting than just simple hack and slash, chop, 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 chop. This is a nice sword. Again, it's maybe not as flimsy as the jian because it's so much thinner, but it's still not a sword I would bring to a sparring match. I like this sword. It was inexpensive, so you know I like that. However, the handle is the only part of it that's really finished. Everything else is kind of rough about this weapon. It does work though. Every movement you make, you can feel the flow of this weapon. It is balanced, even though it is inexpensive, it's well balanced, and it works like a sword would. Also, I enjoy the wooden Tai Chi weapons much more. Something about feeling the flow of energy through your body into the wood of the sword. It's a little bit different than feeling a synthetic handle or metal in your hand. We're not using these swords to spar, so I think the wood is perfectly acceptable. Next up, we have some of the other traditional martial arts weapons that I have on hand. The staff. This is a traditional Japanese staff I got in my karate class. A 5 foot bow. Some people call it a staff, some people call it a bow. Other people call it a bow staff. While they're not incorrect, they are redundant. It's like saying the ATM machine. While you're not wrong, you are annoying. A lot of people hold the staff in different ways. Some people have the double knuckle. The big part is spreading your hands out. However you hold the staff, your hands are somewhat spread apart, except for when you do the big wind-up moves, and you treat it like a gigantic sword, and you just whack something as hard as you can. But then you spread your hands back out. That's what a staff is good for. Good practice for all your cool sword moves. But with no blade, you can put your hands anywhere on the staff. I like staff training. Staff training is good reinforcement of your skills. Next up, we have the White Oak Bokken. White Oak Bokken is one of my favorite training tools. It's thick, it's sturdy. You can do partner drills with this because you're not going to break it. You can clack other swords with it because it's so beefy. Because it's beefy, it's really heavy, and you can get a good swing. Really good training with this. You get a workout when training with the White Oak Bokken. Again, this is another one of my older swords. I've had this ever since college. I used to train with it my lifeguarding shifts when I was off duty, not, of course, while I was guarding lives, but great handle. It's so thick, it really makes you squeeze hard to get the shiburu, very, very technical sword, even though it's just a really thick plank of white oak. It is a great sword, great training tool, one I've had with me for a very long time. All right, next up we have the Suburito. This looks like a red oak bowken. It is not. It is a much larger red oak bowken. It is a big old plank of wood. This thing is really tall, really long. It has a gigantic handle. You can stretch your hands out really far, and then it just gets thicker at the blade. This is just a training tool. This is not for any fancy, kenjutsu. This is not for fencing. This is just for swinging and making your cuts as best as they can be. Just getting the sword over your head is a workout enough. Throwing it out to cut and stopping it, that really tones your arms. Makes them burn, but in a good way. This is a fantastic training tool for exercise, for cuts, not so much for form or for kata or for waza, or for fighting forms, for partner practice. This is only to strengthen your cuts. As it is specialized for that task, it's very, very good at it, I have to say. It's really long, it gives you a lot of torque because you can spread your hands out on the handle, and the blade is so thick and bulky that it gives you a lot of swing. So that's the Suburito. Next up, the Red Oak Bowken. This is great, fantastic for beginners, very inexpensive sword to begin with. The handle is very nice and round. You can actually feel the blade because of its oval-like grip. It is an oval, it is not a complete circle. So you do have the edge geometry where you can feel the edge because it is also slightly curved and weighted so that the balance point is much further from the handle. It gives you a very good idea of the cut, of how it feels when it should, where it should impact as it strikes. That's the thing about these fun balanced weapons is when you feel it swing through the air, you get a sense of where it should impact, where along the blade it should strike, and that gives you like a really good feeling of the force, of the power behind your cut, like where it should impact makes all more sense once you swing a weapon like this. And it's in Japanese shinoji. It really makes it's a feeling. You have to feel it for every sword because they have different centers of impact. You really want to feel it with each weapon, but with this one, it's even more apparent because it is such a rudimentary beginner's weapon that you can feel with this weapon, which is the point. Feeling is believing. All right, Red Oak Bowken, very nice stuff. What else do we have back here? We're out of the swords back here. Oh boy, now it's time to get into some of my metal swords. Ooh. Metal sword number one. We've got this replica rapier. I really only got this as a costume piece. It looks really cool with the brown scabbard, so it would go with any sort of Renaissance fair outfit. It is just a replica sword as I take it out of the sheath. It is cool looking, but it's kind of flimsy. It wobbles. I mean, I guess a good sword should have some wobble to it, some give. However, it is not very high quality steel. It is not sharpened. It does have a tip. You could still put this through someone. That's dangerous. I would not spar with this. It is too flimsy. Like I said, just a costume piece, but man, is it fun to hold. Not as much fun to, practice with. However, it looks cool, and that's what I got it for, so it does the job well. Yeah. And now we have another costume piece that I really enjoy. This is my cutlass for my kind of piratey costume. I love the handguard on this sword. It is gorgeous. Look at that huge hilt. The sword itself is nothing pretty to look at. I should probably polish this, but it is just a fun weapon. I like how it moves. It moves like an actual sword should. Its balance point is right down here near the handle. I mean, it is pretty darn close. It's like, right, you know, it's hard because the hilt, the basket hilt, throws off the balance point. There it is, sort of. It's hard to balance because of this guy, but it's right about there. So that thing really smoothly goes back and forth in your hand like a cutlass should. It is just a beefy sword that you can just slash with. It still has a point, so you can deliver thrusts at an alarming speed. And because of the curve, you can get around some opponents' weapons with ease. Some take a little more skill. But this is a fun weapon. I would imagine locking up with someone, being able to offer them a punch to the face and finishing them off with the blade. This is just a fun one. Even though it is just a costume piece, I like playing around with it because it makes me feel all piratey. Next up, what do we have here but a wakizashi. This is a very cheap, rinkety short sword that I got just to practice with. At first I was practicing sharpening the blade, but once I realized that was useless because the steel was junk, I wanted to practice rewrapping the handle, and I sort of got into it. That didn't work out so well, but it is now fastened tightly, so it works. Unfortunately, it is still a very cheap short sword. However, if you can see the crossguard there, ooh, the cherry blossoms. Very cool design. Unfortunately, it's still a very cheap sword. I keep this around to remind me where I came from, what I started with. It was just junky cheap swords like this that got me into training sword in the first place. And now, here I am today. Next up, we have the Masahiro. Okay, yes, the paint is missing from the scabbard. I could very easily repaint that, but I probably won't, because as just discussed, my skills of painting swords are not all there. I like to swing the swords. So, having taken this out, the Masahiro is a live blade, so this is really sharp. Even though it's not the best cutter because it is kind of chunky, it does have its benefits in that the handle is very long. It's traditionally made. It is high carbon steel. Maybe not the fullest temperament, but it is sharp, it is heavy, and it is the traditional nearly full tang weapon that the Japanese like to make. It's pinned twice here and here. The Mikugiana are inlaid, if you can see that there. Right above the Minuki here and right in there. The thing I like most about this sword is not the cool Suba there, the crossguard with the dragon decoration, even though I am partial to dragons. The best part I like about this sword is almost everyone in my dojo got together and we all got Masahiro swords and we put them together at the dojo. We put the handle on, we chose our Suba, we put the crossguard in, and then we pounded the Mikugiana into the handle. So I'm very, very happy with this sword, even though it's not the best cutting weapon. It's super sharp, and it will do the job. However, the history with this weapon is why I like it so much. All right. Let me put this back real quick. And we're moving on to some of my favorite weapons in my collection, the ones I actually fight with and train with on a daily basis. First up is probably the weirdest of these weapons. It's the cut and thrust owl-looking longsword. It's got a lovely shaped and decorated pommel. You put your finger through the ring here. It's not just for seeing into the future. You actually put your finger in there, and then it gives you more balance when trying to deliver the point. Thrusting techniques, riposting, and swinging back around to give a counter cut. Very short handle. Traditionally, it's meant for one hand, but if you like to cheat, like I do, use two hands when offering the counter cut. This is a fantastic, fun weapon with the double fuller. It's still very heavy, so unless you're thrusting with it, wheeling it around and cutting is very, very slow, even though it can do that and quite well, quite effectively. It's heavy, it's slow in the cut, but it is very long. So you can hold someone off at a great distance just by thrusting, which is excellent. This sword is perfect for intercepting much larger, heavier swords, especially if someone is coming at you with the big Subarito, which I wouldn't do, by the way, but if someone were chopping at you with a Subarito, this sword could easily intercept and thrust past. So, a very cool sword to fight with. It's heavy, it's chunky, it's beefy, but because it is so thrust-centric, you can get past a lot of bigger weapons with it. Very cool sword. However, because I have that sword, I also have this sword, which is much more styled like a very cool side sword or back sword. This one with the Purple Heart pommel. I like this sword very much with the finger ring here. It is much lighter. It is so much quicker and more nimble than the first sword, primarily because it does not have the double fingering. It just has the single with the little backage there. Very nice pommel, gives it a counterweight, and it is well balanced. This sword you can flip around nimbly, offering shorter cuts along with a very nice reach for the thrust. It is a gorgeous sword, also with a double fuller all the way. And then quite a bit nice rounded tip, so if you are sparring with this, I still recommend wearing heavy padded clothing and at the very least face protection if your masks. But this is a rounded tip, so it will not damage you terribly much. It will not penetrate anyway. The sword does crack quite a bit of wallop, so if you're going full force, I recommend lots of protection. But if you're going half speed, which you probably should do in most sword sparring, especially wooden sword sparring, half speed, this is great for just throwing in a few like little quick cuts or like some stabs, some thrusts. It's not going to injure you too terrible as long as you're wearing protective clothing and headgear. This is a great little sword. I like it very much, especially the Purple Heart pommel. It matches my mug with predominantly purple heart in it, the handle, and all the beautiful colors. Kind of goes along with my sword. Next, we have most possibly the prettiest piece in my collection, the other cut and thrust sword made from wangi. I guess it's wang. The wood is called wangi. Wangi. Wang. No one really knows. No, I'm sure everyone knows except me. I just looked it up and I don't know how to pronounce it because I've never heard someone else say it. Beautiful pommel. Again, look at that pommel. Oh, that's gorgeous. Very nice. Another one-handed weapon that you could kind of cheat and use two hands, but this sword is so light, despite being the longest sword in my collection. It's a one-handed weapon that you really can hold people off and keep them at bay because it gives you such a great distance. This is a really tall sword, And the ability to use it with one hand means you get even that much more reach at it. It is quite a spectacular weapon. It looks fantastic. Look at the double fuller on that, huh? The dark handle, the beautiful woodwork. It is a gorgeous weapon. This is another thing you can spar with. It's so pretty you almost don't want to, except it is guaranteed for life in wooden sword combat, so I gladly take this into battle with me. Oh, it's a nice one. Very nice. Very well balanced. Very, very, very good for fighting, offering point and counter cutting. It's just so nice. The angles you get, because it is so long, being a guy on the shorter side of average, really, really appreciate the reach that this sword gives you. Just a great, fantastic little piece. Very maneuverable, very fun to spar with. Maybe not for my opponents, but for me, I love this guy. Great sword. Next up, we're getting into the swords that made my career here. Neela. This one is Neela. It's a sword with a name. Neela is the Sindarin word for dance, because like a good dance partner, she's nimble and very responsive. This is a fighter sword that is made out of oak with a walnut handle, but this has a wasted grip. You'll notice the waist in the middle of the handle. Perfect for one-handed moves and then coming back to two hands. That you'll see very common in Senshi Kenryu is when we throw the sword out with one hand, and then when we retract back, put the second hand back on it. And this handle is perfect for doing stuff like that. You can see the pattern, the wood grain, almost looks like tiger stripes. There's very beautiful wood grain there. The blade has some very intricate, I don't know if that's wine stains or just water that I haven't buffed out yet. But gorgeous, gorgeous woodwork there. This sword is another one that is guaranteed for life in wooden sword combat, and I often do. Because it is such a narrow blade, it's very light and very nimble, I can flip this around, and I actually specialize in fighting people with two weapons with this one sword. Normally the two weapons will be shorter, like our Eskrima sticks, but they'll usually hold them up about here so they can do cool hooking maneuvers. However, because of Neela's reach, I usually can push their sword out of the way and thrust past. Or if they try and do two clacking maneuvers, you know, a very nice wraparound, Neela is so long that in turning the weapon you can actually absorb some of the shock and thrust past. Neela is a great sword for fighting against two weapons because you can do the one hand and two hand recovery, so you can throw it out with one hand attack and bring it back for a two-handed block and counter. Fantastic weapon, Neela. She is so light and so quick on her feet. Makes you feel the same. Nice sword. Next up, we have the sister swords. I love these guys. This is another elven fighter sword, but with a curved handle. Nice curve here for one or two hands. The second pistol grip part of the handle gives you a nice grip for throwing the sword out and recovering, but also when doing the other hand, it really feels like it was meant for one-handed, but when you put the second hand on, you can grab the handle automatically perfect. The grip is, the handle is shaped so that your grip on it is always perfect for our style of sword play. The one-handed moves really do feel like it's coming off the ball of your hand because of the shape of the handle. And then when you put two hands back on, you just feel like it's so much more rigid. While not a very long sword, again, this is an in-between sword, in between a short sword and a long sword. This is a fighter sword with a curved handle. but it has a kind of cherry wood inlay to the grip. Well, her sister's sword has a walnut inlay to the grip. This is the same style of fighter sword, so they're similar length in between the short sword and the long sword length. However, they have the curved handle. While I refer to this one as the brunette, her sister's sword is the blonde. I like to use these swords together for two-sword sparring, mainly because everyone loves doing two swords. Fighting with two swords is super cool and super cinematic, even though some people frown upon two-sword fighting because a lot of people don't think it's been done historically. It has. That's why people think it's so cool. It's just a lot harder to do. Fighting with two swords is so much harder that not everyone can do it. Rightly so, the people that can look really cool when they do. So, two swords, I has them, I use them, I fight with them. Do I fight with them all the time? Nope. I like to practice with one sword because that is what the majority of people do. And that's how our style works. Next up, speaking of fighting with one sword, we have another fighter sword, but this time with a straight handle. So, being that the handle is straight and actually pretty short, you can fit two hands on there, but it's kind of a stretch, and your hands are all bunched up, so it doesn't give you very good manual dexterity over the sword. This is a chopper. You can really feel that the point of balance is further out away from the handle. That's pretty far. So normally it'd be about in here, so you can feel all the nimbleness, all the light dexterity. This sword has none of that. This is a wide blade, very thick and chunky, and it is a chopper. You can tell that the tip is not as pointy. It's a very rounded tip, so it is more designed for that slashing action. And just like with the Tai Chi sword, how you can feel that you can chop with it very effectively. You feel that coasting through a movement, it requires a little bit more finesse and not so much choppy, but cutting, especially with one hand. With two hands, it becomes apparent that this is used for cutting and not anything else. But I like it because it's a great sword that you can just waste away with. You don't feel too bad about messing it up because there's nothing special about it. While it does feel good in the hand, it doesn't look all that pretty. However, the sword is guaranteed for life in wooden sword combat, so I spar with it gladly. Next up, we have one of the swords I fight with on a regular basis. This is my elven longsword. It is shaped a lot like a wooden Japanese sword would be. I'm looking for one in the pile, however, they're on the bottom. So instead of making a big racket and rummaging through swords, I'll just show you this guy. This has the walnut handle again, but it is a thicker, chunkier, and longer weapon. Using two hands, you can spread your hands out, so even though the blade is so long, the handle is so long, you actually can move it around very nimbly. And you get those nice big full arc strikes that Senshi Kenryu is famous for. You can really wind up and deliver a nice counter after your block, position, and counter strike. It's a fantastic sword. It's very well balanced. Again, if you do the little finger test, balance closer to the handle than some. It is a definite focused cutter, even though it has much more of a point to the tip. You can deliver good thrusts. That is not the focus of this weapon. It is specifically for that deflection and counter cut. It is a great sword for that purpose. Also, it doesn't look spectacular, so I don't feel bad taking this into battle and hacking away with it. But this is the sword that I've used probably the most because I don't feel terrible about its life expectancy. The sword is guaranteed by the company that makes it for life against other wooden swords, and it really has earned its weight. It pulled its weight, it's earned its keep. Yeah, it's earned its salt. That's it. And now, probably my favorite wooden sword in my collection, the Elven Fighter Sword with the purple heart handle. Caraluanore, which again, Elvish word for purple heart. I am so clever with my names, aren't I? But the purple heart handle with the nice shape on the pommel makes it perfect for the one-handed strike, two-handed recovery, or a one-handed move with a two-handed riposte and countercut. This sword is much narrower, more narrow than the previous longsword. So you have, that was scary. Happy birthday. You have two swords of varying thickness or width. Both swords are guaranteed for life. However, this sword, because it is so much thinner, is so much more nimble. You can swing this around and thwap people and counter so much easier than the previous sword. That I love training with this sword. I love sparring with this sword. I love having it on my hip because it looks so good that even at the Renaissance Fair, people come up to me and congratulate me on just having a pretty sword. This one makes you feel like a warrior. And then the companion piece for this and the last sword, I know the last one that we'll discuss today, is the purple heart handle with ball grip. See the curved ball grip here. Short sword, elven short sword with the purple heart handle and ball grip. This is exceptionally fast little weapon. This is just a short sword, but you can really flick it out for quick little attacks because of this shaped grip. And it's a ball grip, so it kind of bulges right here, fits perfectly in the palm of your hand. So you can do those quick little tate maneuvers where you twirl the sword and you can block, counter, strike, block, counter, cut, thrust. Ooh, this is a fine weapon indeed. She's so fast, so light, so little that you can, in fact, use it in your opposite hand. And then with your dominant hand, you can use the much longer weapon. But this does limit your ability to push your hand all the way towards the bottom. So you don't get as much torque when you're using it with one hand, but you still can because this sword is so well balanced, you can use this in the opposite hand. And because this sword is very, very little, you can actually track other weapons with it. Due to its size, due to its speed, it makes very good defensive moves so that you can then attack with your main primary weapon, which is really long, really well balanced, and just a gorgeous thing to look at. My favorite sword in my collection at the moment, Caraluanore, the Purple Heart Elven Longsword with straight handle. Don't have a name for the companion piece yet, the Elven Short Sword with the Purple Heart handle and ball grip. Anyway, if you have any suggestions for names for any of my weapons, feel free to post in the comments below. Other than that, have a great day and keep cutting, Senshi.